Hey there, Psychonauts. I'm Pruitt, and this is Jim Davis. And today on WebDM, we are talking about psionics.
You guys are going to have to actually speak. Use your mouths, use your words.
Oh my God, he can't even fucking hear us.
He can't hear us. He didn't go to the seminar.
I bet he didn't even look at the pamphlet.
He didn't look at the pamphlet. I sent a read receipt with an email. He didn't open it.
Let's pick it up from the
scan
top.
Yeah, we should just scan him.
just scan him.
Let's scan him.
Hey, I'm Pruitt.
Now then, let us have a discussion about psionics on WebDM. Hey there, Psychonauts. Just wanted to take a quick aside to just let you know our psionics vid was filmed back in October, well before the most recent UA came out.
Yeah, so if you want to hear us talk about the fighter, rogue, and wizard psionic subclasses, click the link below and check out our Patreon podcast that we made free for you guys to enjoy. Otherwise, follow us on a cosmic journey as we explore psychics in fantasy.
Back to your regularly scheduled WebDM. Jim Davis. Other than the official release not actually happening, why can't we have psionics in D&D? Why do you like this, man?
Why am I like this? It's not my
you're
fault.
not.
Yeah,
I know,
I'm not. I really like.
But
yeah.
why do people not like psionics? And I want to start from here so we can get to the good stuff.
Oh, yeah. So first off, psionics have been in every version of D&D, and in every version of D&D, people have complained about them, and usually those complaints are boiled down to one of three situations, and they are, it's too sci-fi. Mm-hmm. That the concept of psychic power or psionic power is a decidedly sci-fi concept, and that magic is a decidedly science-y concept. I don't understand that worldview.
Like,
period. Full stop. I do not understand that.
Neither do I, because well, we'll get into that with sorcerers versus scions.
Sure, or just the fact that a lot in our, a lot of our own traditions, esoteric traditions in the real world, see magical power as just magic as a ritualized way to access psychic power. I don't see that big of a deal with them, but I see that a lot of people do. This isn't one of those like, why is everybody doing this? I don't get it, and like that it usually happens to me. No, it's pretty clear that the large majority of people, or at least fantasy role players, that they have it's just kind of looked down upon. It's not seen as, part of the fantasy canon or genre. And so, and some people might even look and say, well, that's weird. Why is science fiction stuff here anyway, to begin with? And it has to do with the founding of the hobby and the fact that these definitions have not been so clear-cut across, sort of the genres, especially since D&D came around. Or before D&D came around, they were less clear-cut.
Oh, no, yeah, and science and fantasy were one and the same.
Mixing up all over the place, and sometimes they're blended together in the same story. And one of the things that I've picked up from people who were, nerds and into D&D in the 70s, was that it was a different time to be a geek back then. You never knew who you would meet who would also be into your stuff, because it's like this week I'm reading The Hobbit, but then maybe I'm into Asimov stuff, at some point, and I'm watching Star Trek, and but you have an eclectic sort of taste of just these, fringe genre things that it's not clear who likes them and who doesn't, and sometimes it's all over the place, and you never know who you could run into who would like them. So you didn't pigeonhole yourself as much, and neither did the authors of Dungeons and Dragons. A look at Appendix N shows science fiction, fantasy, different kinds of fantasy, all things influencing them. And by 1976, so 2 years after the game had come out, we've got rules for psionics. Now, some of the other complaints about them are that rules for psionics in at least Dungeons and Dragons are very complicated or too complicated, especially as compared to magic. I take that complaint as valid, especially some of the older versions of psionics in D&D.
Yeah, I mean, reading, my first exposure to it was, of course, second edition, the complete psionics handbook,
sure. Yeah.
And reading through it, I loved reading it. All the powers were awesome. Yeah. But then when you get to that chart, the Psion on Psion combat with Ego Whip and Intellect Fortress and all the attacks and defenses and how it's just my brain starts to melt.
Sure.
That's just a psionic ability. I don't know.
Yeah, and calculating MAC, calculating your MAC.
Your MAC.
And your THACO. Some versions of psionics, it's been treated as a completely separate system, and it has its own attack forms, its own everything. At least in pre-TSR eras, it's you have to roll to activate it. Shout out to, like, say, Power Score RPG. Sean, that's where he gets his handle from. Is this, you have to roll your power score versus the power rating.
So it's a chance to fail.
It's a chance to fail. In just casting, you still had points. And so, like, in other editions, it kind of unifies and everything, especially after third. But I take that criticism. Yeah, sometimes they're very complicated. And if we're talking about, like, original D&D and basic, they're probably also not presented in a way that is intuitive for us. And when we read them, we're just like, what is going on here?
Yeah.
You know, thank goodness for certain elements of the OSR who's, like, have made it their life's dedication just cleaning up the language of some of those original games so that they're more playable and more comprehensible. And the final criticism that I see of psionics and fantasy is just that too similar to magic. Like, we got magic, we don't need another thing. At the end of the day, if you don't like psionics in your fantasy games, you don't like psionics in your fantasy games. I personally think that that's not a fun way to play, and that we expand our horizons and have have the widest array of options available by not, like, limiting anything, even though you might not, you don't necessarily always have to draw from the psychic well.
Some people just don't like that many flavors in the Kool-Aid. Kind of went through a brief history there.
Yeah.
Kind of how it's dotted and popped up in each edition.
We can go a bit more in depth though, because I think there's ideas that are in prior editions of implementation of psionics I think are really worth implementing. 74 original D&D comes out. 76 Eldritch Wizardry, the third supplement, is where psionics are found. It's also where Illithids get introduced.
Oh yeah.
And some other sort of, like, brain monster types.
Insidious influence creeping its way into our gaming.
Original D&D and first edition advanced, and I'm not sure about second edition D&D. Being a scion is something that is available to any character, any human character apart from druids or monks. It's a real missed opportunity there with monks, at least. And it's like a percentage that you roll. And while I don't know the exact percentages, I know it's partially based on a combination of your constitution, wisdom, and intelligence. Those are generally the three stats that psionics are most associated with. And it's like a percentage chance. You roll it once at character creation. And if you, if you qualify as psionic, if you are a scion, then depending on your class, you have certain powers available to you. And so you have to give things up for those. So, like, the more powers you have, say, as a fighter, your strength will start to be lowered. And so you might have a bunch of psionic powers that let you do kind of crazy things, but you might not be as strong as the other, as just a fighter without psionic powers. The one that is really tough is, like, magic user, because the more psionic powers you have, they start taking away both your lowest, like, they start taking away, like, the number of spells starting from the lowest up, and then start taking away your spell slots from the highest down. Oh. And so you just have this compression of the number of spells you can cast as your brain power to access psionic energy increases.
Well, it's got things to do.
Right. That system kind of gets cleaned up in first edition. Both of these have a form of psionic combat that is basically like physical combat, in terms of its procedures and everything, but is not necessarily just like using a power. It's its own. It's like another form of combat gets introduced.
Yeah, it's two scions sitting at a tavern, staring at each other. Just
yes, and much like, say, Shadowrun and Hacker Duels, it sort of like creates a moment where one player is locked in a procedurally intense and intensive system without everyone else being present.
Or they're not knowing about it.
Or them, for one, not even knowing about it. So I'm sure you can have, like, a psionic combat duel in the midst of, like, a more traditional combat. That's how I would probably do it. Or, or just have basically be that, who's protecting the enemy scion while they're otherwise, focused inward on their battle with their rival. Second edition changed things up a little bit more, introduced a proper class known as the psionicist. It changed some of the language, everything, but it kept those attack forms. Now, I find those attack forms very evocative. And what I want out of a combat system for psionics, like, I like that. I like the fact that there's a whole other combat system.
Yeah.
When I first saw this thing, I was like, what is an ego whip? Tower of Iron Will. Like, they sounded like martial arts maneuvers or something, and it was evocative and different. And I loved the idea that there were groups of warriors in these D&D worlds who were dedicated solely to psychic combat. That they eschewed weapons, they eschewed everything else, and they are about fighting with your mind, because there's so many things in D&D that are purely mental, and that you might want someone who's just, like, honed their mind to be a weapon. at your side. And certainly if you're going to go somewhere like the astral plane or tangle with psionic creatures themselves.
Oh yeah, if there's a lot of aberrations in your campaign, having a Psion tag along is not a bad idea.
Not a bad idea. So let's just I want to give some names of these because I think they're really interesting and sort of just flavorful. I don't know what most of these do, but I bet you can kind of infer from them. So there's 5 offensive powers. It's Psionic Blast. Which is pretty standard.
That's just your discombobulating, it just gives you some brain fuzz.
Mind Thrust is the other one. Ego Whip is the third attack. Id Insinuation is a fun one, and then Psychic Crush is the last one. And the way these rules are written, and I recently read them for a different reason, they suggest that they're a hierarchy. You can't select them. You master Psionic Blast, then it's on to Mind Thrust. Because there's a corresponding defense that sort of pairs up with them. There's Mind Blank, Thought Shield, Mental Barriers, Intellect Fortress, and then Tower of Iron Will.
Yeah.
And I loved the idea that there was a balance kind of balance, I am the master of Id Insinuation. Aha, what you don't know is that I have an intellect fortress that cannot be beat.
Yeah.
That's the kind of, I just imagined that was what they were shouting to each other with their telepathy while sweating and bulging eyes and throbbing veins on their head as goblins and barbarians fight around them.
I always loved and thought about the fact that like an ego whip, like when you pop someone right in the ego, right? Like what does that do? It makes you act brashly in retaliation, right?
Sure,
I have to make sure that
And this came with complexity, right? You're dealing with a whole new set of stats that you need, a whole new set of combat stats that you have, because it's possible to engage in psychic combat with a non-psion.
Yeah.
And they have they don't. It's not going to be completely a disaster, but it's not particularly good for them. I loved all of that. They called their powers sciences and devotions. It included crazy things like psychometabolism, which lets you do all kinds of weird things to your body and like complete control over your body, or probability travel. Like the psionic powers always have seemed weirder, more out there, more just like bizarre than magic has to me.
So it's pretty much just been jealousy, the reason people have been pissed.
I mean, I listened. That's a very strong reason for it. There were people I remember in 3rd edition who were like, they are just jealous. Not jealous. Jealous isn't the right word. They were envious of the fact that, like, the expanded Psionics rulebook had a better magic system, more flexibility, more versatility, and not as much dominance that a comparable wizard would. And I've read a lot of people who were just like, I just use that and just call it magic. So if you didn't like fancy and casting, you could use PowerPoints from here. But those are just kind of the concepts from prior editions in D&D. I think it works for like all of fantasy. But when Psionics first comes out, it's a tack on to something else. You're a fighter and a psionic. You're a magic user and a psion. And while there's like psionic classes in Dragon Magazine, they don't become a part of the game until 2nd edition, really. And by then, Psionics has already gotten a reputation for being for power gamers and munchkins and, and all this kind of stuff. All the most abusive builds that you read about in TSR era versions of D&D almost always involve Psionics, which is funny because it's a completely random thing whether you get it or not, and the chances are not particularly great. But at the same time, I love the idea that when I make my character, I'm going to roll this die, and maybe, and something that's completely out of my hands. Maybe there's something about them that's different. That's special. And I love that part of it. I'm one of the things that that modern games, not just D&D, but modern games sort of they don't do it for me, is the way character creation is so much of a choice about curating this playing piece that you're going to interface with and all this stuff. And I just didn't want them. Like, no, I want to find out what I like about it and mold it through play. Just give me something quick and just enough constraints to fuel my creativity.
Oh yeah,
and so I like discovering a character, and what I love about discovering is that they are a powerful latent scion.
In
addition to a warrior.
I completely agree with you there, Jim Davis. Hell, I'm 40 and I haven't figured out all that I'm good at. So I wasn't curated properly, by my player.
We're all randomly created.
Art should imitate life a little bit.
That's a nice sort of breakdown of the Mystic so far, but it also highlights how game designers in Dungeons and Dragons, and I we're singling it out instead of other fantasy games because because it's the flagship. How they do things influences a lot of other games.
Yeah.
And how they balance these two competing systems that seem to be at odds will color people's play experiences.
Right.
How they, all that kind of stuff.
Oh, I completely agree. Because kind of moving into more of the implementation and like how these things kind of sometimes the gears grind a bit. But
Sure.
I want to give an example of like why that doesn't need to be the case. Because there's one of my favorite characters ever. Longtime viewers know that I'm about to talk about TK-808.
Yeah.
Okay. The thing is that was made in the Cypher system.
Yeah. So it's not the system in the D&D. We're playing a D&D game setting though. So it's kind of weird,
but the thing is, the point I want to make is the reason the Cypher system works so well is they don't give a shit what you call it.
Sure.
It
Right.
interacts and it works together.
Yeah.
Whether it's magic, whether it's psionics, whether it's robot cybernetic implants that let you do these powers, right?
Yeah.
That's not the point. They do interact, and just coming into it from a place of these things interact, so it doesn't matter what it looks like.
Right.
I think would rip a big old Band-Aid right off, right?
Sure,
But that's one of the main contentions is magic and psionics the same thing?
What is psionics? How does it interact? How does it relate to the cosmos? Or is it the same as magic? Pre-3rd edition era, magic and psionics are different.
Yeah, they're just different things.
They're different. They do not interact really at all, except in very specific edge cases. And on the one hand, that does present a world in which the psionic user, the psychic character has a world in which no one really is capable of defending themselves against their attacks.
Yeah.
But conversely, they don't really have any special defenses against any of the other attacks that are coming their way.
Hey, a sword will still kill you if you get enough of it in you.
Right, yeah. And so while, they might have abilities that, increase their armor class or, or something like that, they don't have any special protections against magic users. And they're not especially tough. They usually are sort of in the same class of, character toughness as magic users and other kind of primary casters. And so it is sort of a dilemma. I find the bigger dilemma with psionic characters is just the lack of integration of psionics into a world by a lot of DMs. And so, I first ran into it. Well, it's the game where your fighter takes the possessed ring, and the other character in that campaign, once we told him, hey, Pruitt's character's possessed and is about to go do a bunch of fiendish quests to become unpossessed. He was pretty honest, my druid's not going to stick around for that, and is going to leave. And so we've made separate characters to play in each other's primary game.
Yeah.
And the one that
we split the party permanently. And we made it. Yeah, no, I thought it was ingenious.
I really did. I liked it.
For a low player game, that's an aside, but
yeah, and then eventually at the end of the game, the two initial characters came back together.
Yeah.
It was fun because he made a psychic warrior, dwarf psychic warrior, and it sort of challenged me to go well, wait a minute. If there's going to be a psychic warrior in the game now, then there needs to be treasure that supports that character.
Right.
There should be monsters for that character to fight and interact with that play with their rules in certain ways, right? Like thought eaters and brain moles. It was a challenging experiment to try to fit this into the world, but I've seen other games since then where psionic characters are present and they're just sort of, it's just magic by another name. And the uniqueness of psionics is not drawn out and considered. And I think some of that maybe relates to that first criticism where it's psionics is a little too sci-fi and messes with the thatch roof, wad and dauble, dung ages aesthetic that of the faux medievalism that a lot of people have is, they're not focusing crystals and aligning their chakras so that they can astrally project. And I'm like, why not?
People were trying to do that in the real world in that era.
Sure, and there's a lot of spells that try to do that and replicate it as well. So conceptually, what is psionics? Is it a form of magic? Is it something altogether different? Is it, if it's innate, where does that put it in relation to those who can use magic innately, like sorcerers?
Yeah.
All pretty valid considerations. I'm curious what you think, because I've got some thoughts, but I'm tired of talking right now.
Well, for me, I think it would be much easier if it was just psionics are magic. It's just a different way of unlocking magic, right?
Sure, right.
It would just, that would just pave the road and we could move on.
The 3rd edition now.
The 3rd edition model. Now, what this does is why is that not just then a subclass of sorcerer? Why is not psionics you just make the psionicist, or whatever you want to call it, the scion is just a subclass of sorcerer, and it kind of changes how you cast your spells. Maybe you get subtle spell. I mean, I'm hesitant to say for free because it only costs 1 point.
Yeah.
But maybe, you get a certain number of times a day equal to your charisma modifier for free.
For free.
And then you start spending
classes of spells or spell schools.
Yeah. Anything that deals psychic energy. Maybe if you use it on anything that deals psychic energy or deals with psychic energy, you can do subtle spell for free.
Influencing magic.
I don't know. But I do think it should be its own thing. I'm just trying to merge the two. Because I do see the conflict of just like, that comes from within their body, and psionics is within their mind. I guess if you want to look at it from, wizards, it's with study, then you have body, mind, and soul. Sorcerer's body, cleric's soul, psionicist is mind. Right?
Sure.
And you want to talk about the innate casting that doesn't require study.
This is one of those things, when they're first introduced, there's only two other types of caster, magic user and cleric.
Yeah, that's the other thing.
And it's pretty clear where magic users get their spells from. They get them, from different places. Famously, a detailed list of where the different spell levels of a cleric spells come from.
Yeah.
Whether it's their own faith, an angel, the god themselves, that kind of thing.
Right, yeah.
And so psionics comes along and goes, I can do all this of my own power. And that's all well and good until we start changing the concepts behind some of the casting classes. So, Sorcerer gets introduced in 3rd edition, and now we've got a class that I noticed it immediately, because to me, whenever I play 2nd edition, I'd be like, you have to start as a wizard if you want to be a wizard. You can't multi-class into that later. You start as a wizard because someone recognized in you that you had some kind of power, and they wanted to train it. And I remember having conversations with, some people were like, well, maybe I want to multi-class into it later, or dual class in the case of humans. And we'd be like, all right, so, we'll find a way to make it so that you've always had this power. To me, before 3rd edition, wizardry and the act of practicing spells was a combination of study and innate ability. There too. And then now, for me, this is the violence of 3rd edition done to me. Take that concept and permanently rip it apart.
Yeah.
And to permanently say, people with innate magic are this person, and people without are this person. Oh, and now there's a person that gets it from outside source that's different than a cleric. And so by 5th edition, we've got all these different schemes and ways to cast spells. Psionics feels both it's stepping on sorcerer's toes, and also big deal. There's only 8 different ways to cast magic. Yawn.
That's part of it for me. At this point, we have so many different paths. Who cares if there's we found another path?
Yeah,
it's parallel to the sorcerer's path, but it's a little different.
I would resolve it by getting rid of the proliferation of arcane classes and breaking them back down into a single class that has different the subclasses are where you would find that, or maybe not even subclasses. Just do you want to make a deal with a devil? Then contact one. Arrange for some exchange of goods and services for a benefit, and now you're a warlock. That's how I would like to see that handled. That would open up space for someone who is maybe a blend of a sorcerer and a scion. You could have a mind mage or something that represents an intermediary step, where they're doing magic, but it's thoroughly through the manipulation of their mind. And I like that because wizards perform magic by training their minds to be, in classic Vancian sense, prisons for spells, which are demons.
Yeah.
And you can sort of see the progression from study to studying an external source to internalizing that source. And now you've moved beyond the need for crude spell formula, which were always a crutch.
Well, yeah.
To begin with, right?
Yeah. So basically, Psionics is just
it's the more advanced stage of magic.
You start a character with the cheat codes. The one thing that always grabbed me was when I first read those Driss novels. And you're in the Underdark, and it's the Oblodras finally making their move, and there's the time of troubles. Because this is where, obviously, it's different.
Yeah.
Nobody can cast magic, except for these people who have to pretend like they can.
Yeah. So there's wild magic's going on, messing with arcane, clerical magic's out of whack. The psionics are there.
Yeah, but when they describe what that's like with all of them, I don't know. It was just so evocative.
Yeah.
And I think that there's definitely a place in the world. You just have to make it.
It is. And so I think starting with the Underdark is a good place. Like the Underdark's kind of one of those places where it's weird, it's otherworldly. There's already a lot of creatures there that are sort of psionic or psion adjacent. Lithids Grell don't have any psionic abilities, but they can sense living things. It's a giant floating brain. Aboleth, Flumps, Intellect Devourers, all kinds of weird stuff down there that has telepathy or something. And you can kind of justify it as like, well, there's not a lot of stuff down in the Underdark. There's not a lot of like things to harvest to use as spell components. And traveling lights may be a priority. Maybe they develop psionics because it's just a bit more convenient form of interacting with that, power than magic is.
Or it could be you are what you eat.
You are what you eat.
There ain't a lot down there to eat.
There's not a lot down there. You're eating a lot more people, a lot more sentient creatures. Maybe there's the Underdark radiation that does things to your brain.
It's affecting lesser life forms quicker, and then you eat those things, and now it starts to affect you.
Is it the presence of Illithids that makes the Underdark this way, or is it vice versa? Are the Illithids just weird octopeople who spend too much time underground, and now they have a preference for brain?
I mean, maybe, it could be all their portals to the Far Realm, and just the energy that that kind of leaches through those and pervades the Underdark.
Absolutely. So Far Realm's another great one. Is the influence of the Far Realm there? Is it is it the driving force behind psionic energy? So the Far Realm, we'll do a whole show on the Far Realm one day. But brief history, it enters into D&D lore through at the gates of Firestorm Peak, which is an adventure written by Bruce Cordell, and it's there's this weird non-Euclidean sort of place. I think there are Illithids or something in the adventure or something. And it's stuck around. It makes its bit of an appearance in 3rd edition, and again in 4th, and then here in 5th, explicitly as the source of psionic power. And so maybe it's the mutating, maybe being exposed to the radiance of the Far Realm, or exposed to just the concept of it begins to subtly change your brain and just like work its way to new folds and twists, and the brains of scions don't look like the brains of wizards or the brains of normal folk.
Maybe it has four hemispheres.
Sure, yeah. Maybe it's just
two.
Maybe it's got
splits again.
Splits again. Yeah, I like to think wizard brains are all right angles. Like all the wrinkles are just like, that's how they get the spells trapped in there, right? It's not nice curves. So right angles confuse the spell.
See, I would think it's the opposite. It's like the way they had to design cattle houses, where you do them with gentle curves so it doesn't spook the spell. The spell just kind of guides through, so maybe it's more of smoothing out.
That sounds like a sorcerer hippie BS to me. No, you got to break the spirit of those spells. Get them lost and hopeless in your brain so that they're eager to escape and work. No, you don't want them getting comfortable in there.
Yeah. Whereas psionics is like a water park. This is like hop down this slide right out.
So like actually getting down to the nitty gritty of these and like rules considerations, like what does it really mean for psionics and magic to be different? And that means you're committing yourself to dispel magic not working on psionic effects, counterspell not working on them, anti-magic shell not working on them.
Yeah.
You need to look at things like, is see invisibility going to detect psychic invisibility, or does it work so fundamentally different that it won't detect it, and vice versa, right? Like.
And what about that Wu-Gen class in the UA?
And what about that Wu-Gen class where they're mixing both? Well, and I think the mixing of both is obviously it's been there since original, and it expands that conceptual space. Maybe you're the one who's bridging that gap, and you're having some like Doctor Strange moments where you're over here practicing your forms, getting your brain in the right space, and learning the ancient magics because the ancients saw the power that these rituals had in unlocking what's up here.
And you finally get in those chained off books that aren't allowed
that aren't allowed in there, and it's like, oh man, we've been playing with the training wheels on the whole time.
Yeah.
And hence, it's a cool character to play, and shake up the magical world, and like have the various orders and guilds of your campaign react in various ways to this magic user who's able to do a new kind of magic.
I'm sorry, but you have to love the. I guess it would be more the carry. Where it's just a random person who all of a sudden they get pushed to the edge, and then they look at someone and they catch on fire, shatter apart. I mean, like, that's the terrifying part of psionics, right?
Yes.
You literally just look at someone and something happens.
Something happens. Yeah, you don't. There's no gesture. There's no material component. There's no word uttered. It's just pure will, pure intent. And like playing on those tropes about psionics, the fear of uncontrolled power, the fear of the other that say exists in like X-Men or something like that, where I think maybe a lot of people that too sci-fi, it might just be their too comic book.
Yeah.
My response to that in 5th edition is like, seriously, all powers feel like comic book powers.
This is straight comic. This is some comic book epic action.
Yeah, some 4-color comic book epic action. Yeah. I find those unpersuasive simply because they're already mixing genres and tone and theme and everything. But you can have a situation where it's like, what if the wizards are just the wizards and clerics and more established casters of your world? What if it's also the sorcerers? The sorcerers are like, listen, we got this down. We can be born with magic. Magic's a known thing. It's been around so long. People are born with the ability to cast spells. But this new thing over here, especially if you couple it with an unreliability, if there's a power roll involved and they could have catastrophic failure, then that's something different. And now you have it set up for a situation where two sides who should be sympathetic with one another are now at odds. You can sort of like deal with the social impact on your game of this. It can be really fun.
Well, I mean, just thinking about the implications in a social situation with scions. You're at a ball.
God, yeah.
Normally just a social, and maybe you have a duel. You charge a duel, and that's how that happens normally, right? Conflict. But no. This is the ball where a bunch of scions show up, and then people start getting sick. People start having to leave early, and nobody really knows except for, there was a whole combat that happened here.
There was a whole combat that happened here. Yeah, there's a whole psychic combat that happened here. And I, like I said, I would probably try to find a way to bring back, in a simplified form, that psychic combat, because I like the idea of there being different forms of combat. I like the idea of it kicking off a whole separate thing, especially if it proceeds at the same time scale and sort of flow of regular combat, because then you just like sort of work it into the regular initiative order. It all blends. But yeah, I do love that, and maybe that prompts the the person who hosted the ball, when they come back, they've got some sort of terrifying monster that they've hired or acquired to deal with this creature. It's just like, is that a neothelid you got? Where'd you find that thing? He's like, well, this is what I'm going to use to prevent those dastardly brain mages from coming back, or something, or that's where, they don't mind the appearance of these tentacle-faced freaks. They assure us that everything is fine and they're here peacefully. Help us root out these aberrant creatures in our midst.
I'm loving some kind of like psychic entity, like it'd be like a house cat or something that just. It has no sentience of its own, but if there is any kind of telepathy, it just says whatever's being said with telepathy out. It just parrots it, and and that's how you know that there are psychics around.
Yeah. The last psychic character I played was a cat, Jagular Luxray Meowth, who was a psycho sorcerer from the Purple City, ultraviolet grasslands.
Yeah. And
the idea there is that all the house cats have basically become charmers, like enchanters and psycho sorcerers, and he had his own human thrall, it was a very loving, kind relationship. And when Jagular died, his thrall decided that that his spirit lives on inside me now, and I will become a priest of the cat people and go continue my adventure. And so it's weird. Psionics are weird. I'm just random thoughts or things like maybe they originate from beneath the sea. Running an underwater adventure, or campaign, and see why would they have a bunch of spells with verbal components down here? Why wouldn't it just be mind magic? And that's how dolphins do magic, because they don't even have hands, or lips to talk. They got to do psychic magic to do that. So anyway, there's so many things you can do, so many options you can explore, and open up the game a bit. Have some fun with it.
Yeah, just open your mind.
If you like the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe.
WebDM exists thanks to our Patreon patrons, the Web Demons.
If you join the Web Demons, you'll get our weekly podcast, show audio, discounts that'll save you way more than $5 a month on books and dice, and so much more. Check out our free podcast episodes right now, including our free interview with Luke Gygax about all things D&D.
If you like our advice for your games, then why don't you come check us out and watch us play?
Yeah, we've got games on Twitch every week, and they're archived on our second YouTube channel, WebDM Plays.
Thanks for watching.
That was really good. I may just use that.
Let's just use that. That's fun.
That's fine.
Yeah.
So we're done.
So we're done.
Woo!
Hot damn. My ass. My ass.